This is the AAOS Career Podcast, part of the Bone Beat Orthopaedic Podcast channel. This series features conversations on professional development and growth opportunities within the field of musculoskeletal healthcare.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Rex Lutz. I'm the chair of the AAOS Resident Assembly Executive Committee, and I'd like to welcome you to the AAOS Career Development Podcast. Before we dive in, I wanted to thank my predecessor, Dr. Michael DeFore, for leading the Career Development Podcast for the past 2 years. Her efforts have made this show a continued success since its launch in 2021, and I'm thrilled to be stepping into her shoes, although I have very big shoes to fill. This episode will delve into what it means to be a leader in an orthopedic surgeon and how to become the kind of leader others want to follow. To answer these questions, we're privileged to welcome Dr. Steven Gitelis, the Rush Medical College Endowed Professor of Orthopedic Oncology, the Director of the Rush Musculoskeletal Oncology Program, and recipient of the prestigious 2025 William W. Tipton Jr. Leadership Award. For those of you who are unfamiliar, the Tipton Leadership Award recognizes AAOS active fellows or candidate members who have demonstrated outstanding leadership qualities that have led to the benefit of the orthopedic community, patients, and the American public. Dr. Gitelis, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Same.
So let's start by talking about your career at Rush, which has spanned for the past 5 decades. So Dr. George Galante hired you and encouraged you to start a sarcoma program at Rush, which didn't exist at the time. Can you tell me a little bit about how that transpired?
Well, I went to medical school at Rush. That's when I first knew Dr. Galante, and then I did my residency at Rush. And during my residency, Galante and I talked about starting a sarcoma program. We basically had every other specialty covered, but not tumor, not sarcoma. There's one other center in Chicago, University of Chicago, run by a dear friend, Mike Simon. So he asked me, would I be interested? And the second thing he did is he assigned me to work with a visiting professor, Fritz Scheiwitz, who was the head of the WHO Bone Tumor Registry, and he asked me to help him write his textbook on orthopedic pathology, which I did. And at that point, I became hooked. I really enjoyed orthopedic pathology. We looked for fellowship training. It was clear I was going to go to the Mayo Clinic, but I wanted to do more. And we asked the Mayo Clinic, where else might I go? And they recommended I go to Italy and work with Mario Campanacci. He, at that time in Bologna at Rizzoli, did the most bone cancer in the world. So my wife and I packed up and went to Bologna. I spent some months there and learned a tremendous amount from Professor Campanacci. He's one of my very important mentors, of which I have many. And those mentors were critical to the success of my career. So then I came back to Rush and started the program in 1980, which has grown tremendously to now one of the largest sarcoma programs in the region. I mentioned briefly about mentorship. I think that's important. I was mentored, and in a leadership position, I continue to mentor the people I work with. My very important mentors include George Galante, who was the first chairman of the Department of Orthopedic Surgery at Rush, really a visionary, a leader in joint replacement. But in addition, he was an intellect, he was a scientist, and a real gentleman. So he mentored me and really set the path for my career. I mentioned Scheiwitz in pathology. Of course, in Italy, a number of Italian surgeons I work with, and then went on to the Mayo Clinic and was mentored by Doug Pritchard and Franklin Sim, two very great people. Galante also sat me down and asked that I give him a day a week to do basic research, spend in the lab, which I happily did, and that's launched my academic career. The focus of that has been in cartilage research, chondrosarcoma, and as a result, I was awarded an OREF grant to study chondrosarcoma from the human specimens that I was obtaining. So he also talked to me about success. Success, he said, is related to the 3 A's: ability, how good you are, you have to be good, and what you do. Availability, you need to be reachable, especially in this field, because we deal with a lot of young children, and once they have a suspected sarcoma, they need to be seen immediately. So I would see them the next day. The third A is affability. You have to be able to talk to people and your referring surgeons and be personable. And that's would also help promote my career. And then I would add to that list of A's, durability. Obviously, I've been durable. I lasted at Rush 50 years and have no plans to retire at this time. During the course of my time at Rush, I've held numerous leadership positions, which I can run the list. There's some commonality and there's some differences. So I don't know if you want to get into all that leadership, Rex.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm more than happy to hear about it. I mean, you have a lot of years of experience, so that would be fantastic.
Really, the first leadership position I held was president of the Rush Medical College Alumni Association, where I oversaw the medical school and the alums and served on their board. That way I had a great opportunity to interact with medical students who I felt responsible for guiding them, and have also guided them in their career selection, especially if it was orthopedic surgery. Other institutional leadership positions, I was vice chairman of the Department of Orthopedic Surgery under Galante. I was the chief of surgery. I was the dean of surgery. The director of Musculoskeletal Oncology at Rush. I served on the board of the institution. And those are some of the institutional leadership positions I have held. I should also mention, when I returned from my fellowship, I knew there was a need for tissue banking. There wasn't a tissue bank in Illinois. In fact, the first bone transplant I did was on a football player from high school. And I was able to get the bone from the Miami tissue bank. I met the pilot at the airport, grabbed the container, which was one of those cooling retainers. I brought it home because I had no place to put it. And I kept it frozen in my refrigerator or freezer at my home till the next day when I transplanted it. So I started happily a tissue bank in Illinois. I've been the director ever since. It started out as an institutional tissue bank, a Rush tissue bank. Then I realized there's no future in that. Tissue banks were being heavily regulated, so the first decision I made was to join forces with the OPO, the Organ Procurement Organization in Illinois, back then called ROBI, now called Gift of Hope. And that decision didn't make the Rush administrators happy because they lost some revenue. But I said, this is the right thing to do because hospital-based tissue banks were not going to survive. And I was right about that. The next important tissue banking decision I made as a leader was we were sending out our tissue for processing all over the country to vendors, and that was unreliable. And I decided to join forces with a very good friend of mine, Ross Wilkins, another cancer surgeon who was the medical director of Mile High Tissue Bank in Denver. And we joined forces with them, along with a couple other agencies, which now makes up AAOS. And we're one of the largest tissue banks in the country. So I've held the leadership position since the beginning. I've been honored by the Gift of Hope of being their medical director for more than 30 years. Outside of Rush, I was honored to be elected to be president of the Musculoskeletal Tumor Society. That's our national organization. I served actually for 2 years. It was a 1-year term until I took over. I held the job for 2 years. And after my 2-year term, they went back to 1 year. So I don't know if I should take that personally or not. But I was proud to serve and was able to put on an international meeting in Washington at the Air and Space Museum that was a huge, huge success. More recently, I was asked to join an orthopedic manufacturing company, a new one, focused on orthopedic oncology called ONCOS. And I've served as their CMO, Chief Medical Officer, from the beginning. Now it's more than 7-8 years. And that's a quality and a regulatory position, which I enjoy doing. I've been before the FDA numerous times in trying to approve or get approval for some of these devices.
That's amazing. I mean, over those 5 decades that you've been at Rush, you've held so many different leadership positions. What do you think allowed you to thrive in those various leadership positions that you've had?
Well, I mentioned the A's. I think affability is important. I'm able to talk to people, and I think I'm very good at problem resolution. And in any leadership position, you're going to run into problems, and in that position, you're asked to resolve those problems. And I think I do that fairly well. We had a visiting speaker at Rush, Norman Schwarzkopf. He was the general who was very much involved with the Persian Gulf War. And when he came and spoke to us, I'll never forget a line that he said. He said, when in a position of leadership, just do what's right. Don't worry about what other people think. Just do what's right. And I followed that guideline for my whole career. Some of these decisions are tough and perhaps not popular, but you just do what's right and you sleep better at night.
Yeah, absolutely. In the heat of the moment, you can lose sight of that. But if you just keep that in your mind's eye, you'll make the right decision every time. So clearly at Rush, you've developed many leaders over the past years. How does that feel to be a leader of all these individuals that are going out into the orthopedic community and becoming leaders themselves?
Oh, incredible. I just name a few, and I don't want to insult anyone. Ben Miller, who trained under me, went into orthopedic oncology, is now the lead cancer surgeon at the University of Iowa. Cara Cipriano is a lead orthopedic oncologist. Kim Templeton as well. We just recently graduated two residents that chose orthopedic oncology. And I may add, if you don't properly mentor them, they ain't going into orthopedic oncology. We're going to go into spine and sports and joints. But proudly, our two most recent graduates, Sarah Tepper, Mike Feiss, went into orthopedic oncology. And more importantly, Mike Feiss, who did his cancer training at UCLA, is coming back to join me.
Yeah, that's great. I'm sure he'll be really excited to come back and have your continued mentorship as an attending, which is clearly very important and helpful, especially in orthopedic oncology, I'd imagine.
Yeah, let me add to that. Another interesting story. I needed to hire one as the program grew. I looked at a number of orthopedic oncologists. At the end of the day, I hired Alan Blank. Alan Blank is a phenomenally trained huntsman in Utah Cancer Center, NYU trained orthopedic oncologist. He joined me, and he also is my son-in-law. And talk about catching heat for hiring your son-in-law. I did. But he's been with me now 8-9 years, and now the institution and the other orthopedic surgeons love him more than me. So even though I caught heat for that, it was the right decision. And he's pretty much heir apparent to leadership of this program.
I'm sure you guys have a lot of great conversations over the dinner table.
Well, mentorship, he trained at Huntsman in Utah in cancer and worked with a great orthopedic oncologist. But still, when he got to Rush, there were a lot of operations he had never seen before. So for the first 2 years, I scrubbed with him and shared my experiences, and I think it continued his fellowship for another 2 years. Now he's phenomenal. He does A in everything.
Yeah, that's a great position for him to be in. So speaking of experiences, you were kind of around musculoskeletal oncology before limb salvage was an option, where a lot of patients ended up receiving an amputation when they got the diagnosis of something like osteosarcoma. Can you tell me a little bit about the history of like how limb salvage developed over your career?
So it was just starting to be done during my fellowship, 1980. The data was pretty clear from Mike Simon and others that there's no survival disadvantage to try to save the limb. The outcomes were the same. So obviously our patients want us to try to do that. What really was interesting was back around that time, there were no off-the-shelf implants. The implants needed to be custom made, which took 8 weeks, more or less. So Ralph Markov in New York, working with Jerry Rosen, started giving chemotherapy during that 8 weeks, waiting for the device to be made. And lo and behold, survival jumped. So that's the beginnings of neoadjuvant chemotherapy, which is standard nowadays. So limb salvage in my practice, probably most orthopedic oncology practices, about 95%. And that includes children. So we do mostly limb salvage. So the next step is we've improved survival. So that outcome has improved. The next outcome measure is saving a limb. And now we're at the point of durability. How long will that limb last? And then the final important outcome are PROs. PROs are being done everywhere in orthopedics, patient reported outcomes. So it's no longer binary for an outcome, survival or no survival. Now implant durability, and of course patient reported outcomes and function. So in many ways, we're a victim of our own success because they're living longer, a higher percentage. You got to do more. Survival is just one factor.
Yeah, absolutely. Optimizing the PROs is an exciting thing because that means they're living longer and surviving this diagnosis, which is fantastic. So when you recount many of your contributions to the field of orthopedic oncology, which ones would you say you're most proud of?
Well, I've covered a lot of areas, and on the basic science side, I'm known for my chondrosarcoma research. In fact, I received an OREF grant, happily, to study chondrosarcoma. Dedifferentiation is something that we looked at extensively in tissue culture. So I'm very proud of my work in the laboratory on chondrosarcoma. Clinically, we publish a lot of papers at Rush, nearly 20 clinical papers a year. Now, as the CMO of Oncos, we've come up with some really new, exciting developments. Number one, 3D printing. 3D printing in orthopedic cancer surgery is hugely useful. We use it to get the cancer out properly with a cutting guide as determined by the digital images and the plans made by the engineer. And then we use a cutting guide to cut the allograft, the bone, so it fits precisely, because the outcome of an allograft is directly related to the osteosynthesis. You have to have a very precise fit for a good outcome. So that's one development. Another development is a porous collar. So implants, total hips, total knees, many instances are fixed with cement. But what 3D printed collars allows for is extracortical bone ingrowth. So the bone will grow into the porous surface, and so you have both the cemented stem as well as a biological fixation into the porous collar, which hopefully will aid in durability. Our most recent development has been in nano-coating these cancer devices, because in my world, infection is horrendous. And it's not uncommon. It's been reported between 10 and 25%. And an infection of a limb after limb salvage is horrible, because you're looking at an infected implant and it has to be removed. You're left with 6, 8, 10 inches of missing bone. It's just miserable. So we've been working on a nano coating, a non-eluting nano coating. It's now FDA approved for that, to protect the implant during implantation. And I'm using that regularly now.
That's great. Yeah, if I remember right, when I was on my orthopedic oncology service, I remember seeing or hearing a case of the custom cutting guides, and they used it on the acetabulum. And when the pathologist reviewed the section, it was like they hit the margins perfectly. So kudos to you guys for developing such a great product. And then I also remember the mega prostheses, all the infection that can happen from the dead space. So that's going to be another great thing for the patients to try to limit those infections in those patients.
Exactly.
So another very interesting thing I learned about you is you were already a surgeon, and then you chose to go to the U.S. Navy in the late 1980s and early 1990s. What inspired you to do that?
I did the North American Traveling Fellowship, a great experience. One of my stops was at Wilford Hall. I met John Eady, who was an Air Force surgeon, oncologist. They said, Steve, come on, why don't you take a commission in the Air Force? We need you. We need orthopedic oncologists. So I sort of let that stew for a while, but ultimately I did take that commission because I wanted to expand my horizons. I didn't need it to pay for medical school or residency. I was already a professor. I just did it as volunteerism. But much to his chagrin, my commission was in the Navy, not the Air Force. I'll never forget when I took the commission, the recruiter said, Doc, don't worry, we haven't called up the reserves since the Korean War. And then 2 years later, the Persian Gulf War, I was called up. I got the phone call and I was asked to report within 3 days. And I left my wife, my dear wife, with 5 children, 8 and under. When are you going to be back? I don't know. So I was gone 7, 8 months, not to combat. Although I was being prepared to go on a Marine ship, but no, I never saw combat. I went to Bethesda Naval Hospital, and lo and behold, what did I do there? Orthopedic oncology. And so I got to mentor the ortho residents in the Navy. And what I found out is they are incredibly mature. And the reason being is they have to spend multiple years out in the fleet before they even get to that point. And that's a maturing experience.
Absolutely. They're very lucky to have had you come over there to train them. And for the patients that needed surgery, that's great for them that they were able to have your expertise there. So during that time, it's a kind of a different way of leadership. And since we're talking a lot about leadership, what was your experience of leadership within the military like?
Well, I learned about chain of command, very, very important. It's as a military physician, but also as a civilian. There's a chain of command that needs to be respected. And I brought that back with me into my practice at Rush. So I learned that. Of course, needless to say, respect and honor. These are military terms everyone uses, but they're true. I mean, they're drilled into you. And it was important. I got to do something very interesting. I wanted to do something different. So during my months at Bethesda, I went to a naval air station, went through backseat qualification. I almost drowned doing it. And then got to fly a backseat in several jets, which was an amazing experience. So it added to my life's experience.
That sounds fun. Those go fast. And did you pass out?
I didn't pass out, but I think I came off the flight 1 inch shorter. My discs were being squeezed down quite a bit, but they reconstituted in time.
Good. I'm glad. All right. So at this year's annual meeting, you received the Tipton Leadership Award after Dr. William Tipton. From my understanding, you were actually friends with Dr. Tipton. So how special is this award to you?
Because of that friendship, very special. So he and I joined an orthopedic group called the 20th Century Orthopaedic Association, which is it's an honor to be chosen to be in that group. He was in my class along with, I think, 5 or 6 other surgeons. So I got to know Dr. Tipton very well. We're obligated to finish our application with a skit. We had to put on a skit. And if you don't do the skit, you don't get in. So he wrote the skit. It was very, very well received, and we certainly got our membership. But I got to know Dr. Tipton, and his loss was a huge loss to orthopedics. What a leader he was, let me tell you.
Yeah, that's great. What an honor for you to win that. And again, congratulations. So we talked about the things that quality a leader must possess. How about those mostly the 3 A's is what you went over. What are some qualities that a leader absolutely can't have or, should avoid?
The list is long, I would assume. Fortunately, I haven't run into many of them. You really need to be able to talk to people and conflict resolution. If you're not a very good speaker or talker, I recommend that leaders not communicate digitally. I recommend you talk to people. I think there's too little of that. So those that are unwilling to directly communicate, I think, is a mistake. The other thing in leadership, is to provide firsthand interaction. In other words, you yourself should interact with the people that you need to. Don't put mid-levels or others to do your bidding. I think that's a mistake. I see too much of that in orthopedics, where some practices are so large and the patients are seen by mid-level providers. They rarely see the surgeon. Surgeon doesn't talk to the patient. I think that's a mistake. I really do.
Yeah, for sure. We're leaders within not only our own practices or institutions, but also with our patients. So that's a great point. And then, I guess I'm early on in my career, fifth year resident. What kind of advice would you have for myself or others in my position on how to become a great leader, since we're just getting started here?
Find out what's your passion, and don't be afraid to go out on the path least taken, which is what I did. I have a twin brother who's an orthopedic surgeon, love him, but he chose this straightforward, simple path. I think he missed out. So I did things I didn't have to do. I did them voluntarily because I had a passion. And I would encourage you, Rex, to do the same. Go to Europe, do fellowships elsewhere. Volunteerism, really, really important. I chose the Navy. It doesn't have to be the Navy. It could be your church, your synagogue, anything, your mosque. Volunteerism, I think, is important that you should engage in readily. And then, of course, a mentorship. The people below you, and I don't look at them as below me, but they need your help. They need your guidance.
That's great advice. I hope, everyone listening to this podcast takes a piece of that with them and goes out and contributes to the field. Dr. Gitelis, I just want to say thank you for your time, your insights, your service to this country, and just talking to us about becoming a leader. So we appreciate it.
Thanks, Rex. And I wish you great luck and success in your career, and call upon me. I can now talk to you and mentor you as well.
Thank you so much. That's an honor.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the AAOS Career Podcast, part of the Bone Beat Orthopaedic Podcast channel. Hosted by Dr. Rex Lutz and featuring special guest Dr. Steven Gitelis. Production and editing by MK Quinn Media. To hear other conversations on professional development, please visit aaos.org/The Bone Beat.